Hello, everybody. I'm Claire Buchanan, and I'm the Head of Environment and Innovation at Align Farms. Thanks for joining us today on our online field day. We're disappointed to not be able to have you all on farm, but hoping we can answer all your questions and address all your interests today. There will be an opportunity to submit questions that we will have a link at the bottom of this video. So I'll pass it over to Rhys.
Hi everyone, I'm Rhys Roberts, the Chief Executive at Align Farms, and today I'm joined by Kerry. She will introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kerry Roberts, and I manage Align Clearview, where we are doing the Regen trial.
So today we're going to take you through a bit about who we are and where our Regen interpretation has taken to us over the last 2 years, and then also we're going to flow into some data, some financial data, and also some fertiliser data. Some fertility data. So I'll start with a bit around Align. So Align Clearview is owned by the Buchanan family, who base themselves in Central Otago, and we have a team of 31 across 6 farm properties of mid-Canterbury. We purchased our first farm and started milking on in 2013, and we supply both Fonterra, Synlait and Westlands. We're also a vertically integrated business that has a shareholding in a processing facility and a yogurt business. There's about just under 1,800 hectares within Align, milk about 4,500 cows across the 5 farms and the 1 dairy support farm. So the farm in the white is Align Clearview. It's located in Westerfield, and that farm have split 148 hectares of it is regenerative, 148 hectares is conventional, and we're comparing the 2 systems. The purple farm up the top is our dairy support farm in Mount Somers, and then we've got some farms scattered around the Ealing district. That's a bit around Align Farms. So I guess 2 years ago we had the opportunity to look at finding a better balance from our farming system to see whether or not there was a way that we could balance productivity, environmental outcomes and social outcomes as what we see as the 3 key pillars of a farming business or any business for that matter. So we started with the initial Regen interpretation that come out of the States, out of a large cropping businesses over there. They have adapted Regen farming. So they were maintaining a living root year round, minimising soil disturbance, maximising crop diversity, keeping the soil covered and integrated livestock. So we certainly took to the maximising crop diversity piece and invested in about 60 hectares on that farm of diverse species. So I guess we started with reducing ploughing back to less than 5% of our platform. We were terminating with glyphosate and buffered that with fulvic acid, fish fertiliser and EM, and then we were drilling in these 15 to 25 species soil primer crops, and they were there to kind of set the soil up, so to speak, or prime the soil ready for perennial species without synthetic fertiliser or inputs. We eliminated all synthetic fertilisers and sprays from the Regen side of the farm, and we replaced that with natural sources, with the compost, manure, fish fertiliser. We adapted like holistic grazing management, which was graze 30%, trample 30%, leave 30%. And then we were directly in after that, drilling in 8 to 15 species perennial pastures post first grazing. Pushing our round lengths out to 30 to 50 days from the traditional 20 to 23 or 20 to 25 on a conventional system. And we were moving the animals frequently up to more than 3 times a day in high density moves. So they were getting the trampling and effects. So, and we were going into, say, 5,000 covers and coming out at 2,500. So that was a bit around where we initially started. And that's what it looked like. So quite polarising, so to speak, towards a more traditional farming system in New Zealand, where we were, these were 10 to 13 tonne crops of diverse species. So that was kind of gives you an indication in the top right hand corner is kind of what we're leaving behind, trying to trample it into the ground. And we're really impressed in this space around biodiversity. It brought a lot of good biodiversity to our farm. And we're really, really impressed with the soil compaction, that it really does help from if your soils are badly compacted. Some of these big tap roots really penetrate and free that soil up and aerate that soil. We've been impressed with that. some of the challenges we've seen were some of the commercial sides of it. It was quite challenging. The second and third grazing were quite challenging. So we've kind of pulled back in this space. And have you got anything to add there, Kerry?
No, other than that, it was a great for having feed on farm and pushing your round length out. You can pretty much halve your round length by getting into these diverse crops once it's fully established.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of started looking at how do we take this to the next level and how do we start commercialising it. We're aware that we needed to, if we were going to have change in the industry, we needed to make sure that every mother and father investor in the country could come along with us. So we decided that, hey, look, we really like the benefits that the diverse species brought to us around biodiversity and also soil compaction. However, we just felt that if we wanted to really push forward, we needed to commercialise it and make sure that we could actually maintain profitability levels. So that's kind of where the Regen Interpretation 2.0 come from, which was instead of maintaining a living root year round, we look to maximise it. So we still feel at the end of the day, if we need to remove a crop and replace a crop, there is a time where we will have to go through without having a living root. But let's try and maximise that and minimise the time that if we are transitioning through. Minimising soil disturbance we feel is important. Instead of maximising crop diversity, we believe in increasing crop diversity. So, like get as many as you can in there, but it's, there's a point where it just becomes too much. Keeping the soil covered is critical. Like we have a lot of wind and water damage in Canterbury when we have exposed soil. So that's hypercritical in our view, is to try and avoid not having the soil covered at any point in time. Incorporated livestock, it happens throughout New Zealand anyway. That's pretty commonplace in New Zealand. That's where our pastoral systems are so strong. And empowered people and engaged communities was the two that we added in there. And that was more around saying, hey, look, this whole regenerative agriculture thing's more than just cows and grass and soil. That's how we look after our teams at a social level, opening up the minds of the team and really trying to empower them to look at food production in a different light, rather than just looking at us as just a standard farmer from down the road. We're looking at it from a food production perspective, and engaging communities is critical to any social wellbeing project that we undertake, is trying to make sure we do have an engaged community, because that's where learning happens and agreement comes from. So I guess that's where we got to. So kind of what that looked like was we're still less than 5% of the platform. We were still terminating with glyphosate, but now we look at planting 20 plus species spatially separated across the farm. So they're in teams of diversity. So there might be like 5 or 6 in any one paddock, and it might be ryegrass, chicory, plantain, clover, and a couple of types of grasses, a couple more types of clovers. And then there might be a tall fescue dominated one, or a herb dominated one, or a lucerne dominated one. So we're getting the benefits of shoulder season growth. One thing we've worked out is we thought that shoulder growth was going to be really, really strong through with the diverse pastures. We've actually seen the reverse to that. So now we're looking at, hey, look, diversity is great, but just diversity for diversity's sake isn't. So now we're looking at these teams of diversities to try and harness species strengths. So ryegrass is an exceptionally great grower through the shoulder seasons, whereas during the summer season it goes to seed and drops quality. So can we grow lucerne through the summer to maximise sunlight hours, or is there another herb mix that we could use through summer and rely on the ryegrass through the winter? So I guess it's around, instead of just putting everything in every paddock, just trying to spatially separate it. And as I say, we're drilling them in teams of 6 to 10. And then we're looking at adding diversity pods to promote beneficial factors. And this is not an area that we've excelled at this stage, but the thinking behind this is, let's say you've got 6 species in a paddock. We still believe there is benefit to having up to 20 species within the paddock. We just don't agree potentially with having them throughout 100% of the paddock. We're looking at putting the last 10 to 15 species, or potentially 10, into pods of diversity. So they may be 2 or 3% of the platform in a shape of a kidney, or in a wetland area, or up against a fence line. So we are still promoting beneficial factors like birds and bees and butterflies and insects and interest to the farming system. So they may get grazed by the cows every 2 to 3 times, so that we're still getting that gut biome. Or they may just be shut up, and that's an area that's just there to promote birds and the bees and the caterpillars and the insects. So that's kind of where we're going to go with it, is focusing on having, you know, diverse species, but not 20. Like, we'll still have 25 species across our farms, but they'll be structured and spatially separated. We've kind of dropped off our hard stance on synthetic fertiliser, and don't get me wrong, we haven't put it on to date. We're now into our 3rd year without synthetic fertiliser. However, one thing we are acutely aware of is that, you know, if we want to make a system that's going to be repeatable for our communities, you know, it's all well and good for the first 5 people to have synthetic fertiliser, but, you know, to use mushroom compost and pig manure and chicken manure, but the rest that follow won't have that opportunity. So we've kind of moved to, hey, look, if we need to use synthetic fertiliser, we're not opposed to doing so. However, it's kind of just one of the tools in the toolbox. So we'll look at using other methods first and then moving from there. But so far, so good. We haven't used any to date. Round lengths between 25 and 45 days. We haven't got any lower than 25. I think the fastest Kiri's got to is 29 days. She can speak to that soon around round lengths, but anywhere between 25 and 45 days. Animal optimizing animal movement. So we're not saying that moving them 3 days or more than 3 times a day is critical. However, one thing we do know is when you do have poor pasture quality, high intense grazing does really tidy those paddocks up. You can trample in any of the poor parts of the paddock and see that replacing. We've got a photo of that working. And then using deferred grazing to manage surplus and deficits, or to reset pastures. So going in, if a paddock's getting a bit older or tired, or we want to reset it, so to speak, or we've got a deficit, using deferred grazing to push feed into the shoulders of the season. And focusing on carbon to nitrogen balance. And that's not so much like getting out there and doing any chemical tests. It's more around, hey, look, we just can't keep just putting plant matter back into the soil. Otherwise, we end up tying up our nitrogen to breaking down that pasture rather than actually growing the next crop. So because we aren't adding any nitrogen into the system, or very little, I think we've added about 5 kgs of N to date. We need to be making sure that anything that we're capturing through our clovers and through our legumes is going into growing the next crop rather than breaking down the previous one. So have you got anything to add there, Kira?
No, only regarding the round length. We got down to a 29-day round, and it's more based on what everyone's going through of a start-stop season regards to grass growth. So it's hopefully going to really take off now, but we are trying to push it, get it back out so that we can start locking some paddocks up for silage, so that in the following season we have a bit more feed on hand from it in-house.
Yeah. So I guess what it looks like now to where it did look like is it looks like your more your traditional farming sense. We do have on the top left there, we've got one of the paddocks that's been trampled and the new feed coming through it. And as you can see on the top right and the bottom left, that's kind of the pre-grazing covers that we're going into and coming out of it. So it's kind of between 4 to 4,500 cover coming out at 2,000 cover. And the middle one's probably just an indication of what a biodiversity pod could look like. High in diversity and let it graze a bit longer and try and bring an environment for beneficial factors. And the bottom corner is a kale, vetch and Princeton clover winter feed crop that we grew on the dairy farm without synthetic fertiliser and sprays. So we are seeing the benefits to diversity, however, not when it's at 30 species. We're seeing it's good. It does it definitely solves an issue around compaction and biodiversity on farms. However, we're finding that somewhere between 8 and 15 is a more prudent way of doing it. So that's kind of you can probably see the difference between the two systems. We've kind of gone away from the high-end sunflowers crops to more your traditional grass-based, longer grazing rounds, higher covers, and seeing some really good rewards out of that. So we're quite comfortable with where we sit at the moment.
That the bottom left-hand corner, that is actually been through a sunflower cover crop prior to that being drilled with a diverse grass mix. So that has actually been through it, and you do see flowers and mixes from the original cover crop mix come through, and then it kind of just slowly goes away to more grass species dominated. But that was about the 20th of December last year, that picture. So on my conventional side, I pretty much was almost feeding out if I had to compare the two systems, along with most farmers in the area.
So Claire's going to take us through some farm system trials of what we're actually trying to achieve here, and then we can start going through some of our data.
Yeah, so we put a lot of time and effort into designing this trial and trying to address as many as questions that we have and we thought others in the farming community may have. We have encountered challenges in this, so some areas we aren't addressing, but we still hope to in the future. So the 5 areas that we're focusing on are the financial outcomes, environmental, milk quality, animal health, and social outcomes. And you can see a list of the sort of things we are looking at. In terms of the environmental side of things, that's kind of where a lot of the questions still will remain, and the areas that we are struggling to test. We're going to do what's listed here, but yeah, in terms of water quality, we definitely struggled to find a way to develop a testing methodology that could accurately separate the 2 farm systems, and without putting in significant amount of lysimeters and stirring up the soil structure. So there's still a few areas that we aren't managing to address, but we have kind of shifted the focus to look more at the farm systems and try to answer those questions there, with the hope that scientists in the ag space can further this research with areas that we identify as being worthy of investigation. So we are working with a lot of great scientists already. We're working with Manaki Whenua, Ag Research, Dairy NZ, Lincoln University, and yeah, they've all been great and really supportive in helping us design this trial and yeah, try to collect as much data as possible in the process.
So this is the latest on our website. The data goes up weekly, so we're fully transparent in our data. So this is a week's worth of data here, so you can see the difference between cows and milk, or stocking rate, production per cow, production per hectare, which is we're about 90 milk solids a hectare ahead on the conventional side, which is a sign of stocking rate. Milk solids per cow, the regenerative farm's about 6 milk solids a cow ahead at this stage. And that was a lot just in the last couple of weeks. Now our covers are getting higher. We are seeing that the milk solids per cow drop down. So, Kerry, have you got some views on that?
No, we just think that it's possibly due to quality of feed, which we knew was going to happen, and it should correct itself more on the regen side as we cut silage and tidy it up.
Yeah. So at this stage, we're 6 milk solids a cow ahead on the regen side. However, we're going at the today we're 1.1 milk solids behind on the regen side. So it'll take 60 days for us to claw that back. So over the next 20 to 25 days, we'll start making a call on where our per cow production will land. But we were targeting 420 on the regen side and 440 on the conventional side. At this stage, the regen's actually ahead of the conventional, which is interesting. So it's a bit about per cow. Milk production per hectare, there's a clear line between stocking rate and per hectare production. The conventionals pretty much always been ahead, and we at the moment they're 90 ahead, and we expect that to get to probably somewhere between 300 and 400 kgs of milk solids per hectare difference by the end of the season. And really that is stocking rate that's driving that. At your view, Kerry?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty self-explanatory. Somatic cell count's been quite interesting. Just just at a macro level, our cell count on this farm's been higher than last year. However, we've seen the regenerative regenerative herd just be consistently high. So this is an area that we thought that the cell count would be lower on the regenerative farm. So we've been quite intrigued by this, and just talking to a few people that when we split the herds, we split them on BW age and calving date. So we've been asked to go and have a look at what the somatic cell counts of those herds were last year. It's quite interesting that even though you would assume that probability and statistics would be even, last year the regen herd had an average cell count of 144 and the conventional was 117. So I think we potentially brought some somatic cell count, a higher somatic cell count across, but not taken away from that. I still think that potentially we could be, because we're having to consume a lot more feed on the regen side because the quality is lower, potentially that's having requiring more energy from the cow, so they're not in a position to fight somatic cell count, or potentially the environment with the longer covers is promoting more of the cows sit down a lot more on the regen side, so potentially that's an issue, but it's something we're going to have to track. I think at the moment you could draw a conclusion between the higher cell count from last year and the higher cell count this year, but Kerry's in the cow shed, she knows a bit more than me.
No, that's pretty much where we're at with it now. So I guess we'll just see how the season goes, and then going forward, monitor it even more. I think the hard thing is that we can't exactly go back and resplit the herds to make that fair. So, and it's not really something we thought about when we did split the herd. I guess you could we could have split the herds on 10 different things, but it just, the 4 was enough, and confusing enough.
Yeah. So that somatic cell count is definitely a difference. Average covers, consistently being high. I think only at one point they were even. But like at the moment, I think we've got a cover of 2,800 on the regen side and 2,200 on the conventional side. So, this is probably a reflection of our milk production per cow on the regen side. Yeah, it's challenging to try and get it right. Like what is too much cover and what is not enough. We feel in that 2,600 area, it's quite a good sweet spot for the regen side. So we're just looking at the moment around maintaining pasture quality, and we'll look at doing some topping if need be. But at this stage, we certainly, one of the fatal mistakes we made, a mistake for young players, to be perfectly honest with you, is we probably come in with a low cover, and we really need to be coming in at 2,600 and trying to hold that cover for effectively 12 months and repeat that year in, year out. But coming in at 2,200, I think we dried off at 2,200 and the farm flooded for about 5 days and saturated, and we come back to 2,200. So that put us under a lot of pressure, like our supplementary feed. And it's been a tough season, to be fair. Like, this is not the season to be comparing data with anything, to be fair, not into the intensity that we're doing it. So it's been tough, but we're in a sweet spot now. That 2,600 cover is a real sweet spot for the regen. It's just, you've got enough. One thing that's really interesting is, even though you got a cover of 2,600, you're still actually constantly looking for that last paddock. And the reason for that is, you might, those last couple of last week or so of that regen, you're on a 30 day round, you'll grow 150 a day for that last week, so you can kind of put on 1,000 cover in that last week. So you drive around the farm on a Monday thinking, well, where the cows are actually going to go on Friday, and then Friday comes around and you got 2 paddocks that are ready to graze. So it's actually been quite hard to get our heads around. Well, it has for me. Kerry just thinks I'm just not that in depth with it, but maybe on that I've run my course. But Kerry can give us some more feedback in that space.
So the main reason why we come in with such a low cover was purely because we had to we tried to regrass as many paddocks as we could last season for the trial. So that was we just had to do that. So that's why we come in with such a low cover, but we know now going forward that we just can't do that. As for picking paddocks, I think the season says it all for many farmers, that one week you can cut silage and then the next week you can't. So it's been no different on the regen side, and it's a little bit more deceiving on the regen side because there is a lot more feed there. So when you've got your conventional hat on, you can clearly see the what you've got in front of you, and if you can cut silage or mow a paddock or whatever, it's quite a lot harder to see that on the regen side and make that call. But I believe going forward we should get some good paddocks from that.
Yeah. So yeah, this is daily pasture growth. So it's independently plate metered weekly, and yeah, apart from I think there's been 3 or 4 weeks where the conventionals outgrown the regenerative, but this has probably been the area of that we've been the most surprised about, is that pasture growth, daily pasture growth's been consistently high on the regenerative side. And what we're seeing is when you put fertilizer on those conventional paddocks, they'll consistently grow 40, 50, 60, or 50, 60, 70 a week through that 21-day period before they grazed again. Whereas with the regenerative, you might get a 10, a 15, a 55, 120, and 170 over the 4 to 5 weeks that you're grazing it, non-grazing it. So that that blaze of growth right at the end was certainly really capturing that, and that's what's generally pushing our pasture growth rates up. If you look at the cumulative one on the next slide, it actually shows that we've grown more feed, so we're about 500 kilos of feed per hectare higher on our regen side to date. So we expect potentially that may start getting closing up near the end of the season when we go through the shoulder seasons, but to date, we've grown consistently a lot more pasture on our regenerative side without urea and focusing on longer grazing grounds and diverse pastures. So what's your view on that, Karen?
Yeah, it definitely has been, but I also think that the graph would have shown more. We have 40 hectares out of the 148 and still in ryegrass on the regen side. So that gets no synthetic, and that's been really challenging for those 4 paddocks. And we do struggle when you're going in the round. They just definitely don't grow the feed like the diverse, even comparing to the conventional getting synthetics. So I think that the graph there would be a bit more of a gap if they were in diverse mixes.
Yeah, good. So obviously it's pretty clear difference between the regen from an end perspective and conventional. So we put on just under 60 kilos or units on the conventional side and about 3 on the regen side. So conventional will put on about another 5 rounds or another 125 units. So they'll get up to kg of N, they'll get up to that 185 mark, and the regen might get to 5. If we're really courageous, we might get it to 10. So obviously a clear difference between end use on those sides of the farm. So, yeah, Kerry's point that she raises, that's been a real concern for us, is the 4 paddocks that are still in ryegrass and clover have really struggled this year. We've been it's been pretty disappointing. So we've put some 4.5 ton of pig manure on them about a month ago, just seeing if that will work, and I think that's going to take time to kick in. But so at this stage, our next cab off the rank would be to put some SOA on those paddocks to try and push them along. But we're just monitoring that closely, but really impressed with the paddocks that have been in diverse pastures for three odd years now, that is full of clover and performing right at the top end of the farm. So now we're really impressed with those. Yesterday mastitis treatments, back to our original, we've had some challenge around cell count, and that's flowed into mastitis treatments as well. So this is treatments rather than cases. So the regen herds had, if you could almost divide that number by 3, so 4% of the herds had mastitis this year versus about 2% or 2.5% on the regen side, on the conventional side. So hey, look, we've got some work to do here. So our intention, we thought this would be better on the regen side, but it's been better on the conventional side. So further work's needed there. Yeah, what's your view, Kira?
Just general mastitis overall, comparing season on season, this is something that's usually not a concern to me, and this is, it's been definitely harder this season. Same with cell count, it's usually not really a concern to me, the averages. So yeah, I'm not really comparing the data just yet as to if the regen side makes that much of a difference. I think I'll base it on next year, but yeah, it's been a hard season.
And year-to-date animal health treatments, again, treatments are higher on the regenerative side. You know, Curry can probably speak to more of this. She knows the ins and outs better than me around metabolics, mastitis, lameness, and retained membranes. They're the four big metrics. How are they tracking herd by herd?
So on the regen side, we had more RFM metritis cases than the conventional side, and same with the metabolics. The metabolics was come up pretty early in the season, and purely I think that's because of the feed. They actually weren't wintered any differently as apart from the split. It's just that 200 of the regen girls were wintered 20 days on grass prior to calving. So I think that's where most of my metabolic issues come from, that regen herd. But yeah, there's been a definite, it's been higher on the regen side, but I would, like I said, with the last thing about the mastitis is the metabolics is probably the only one that I could really say is actually a difference. The rest, I think it's more a bit of a luck.
Yeah. So no, it's fair to say there's some work on there. It's like visually the cows look healthier, condition scores higher on the regen side to conventional. There's not anyone that comes on the farm that can visually see the difference between the herds from a coat perspective. So we know there's some good stuff underlying it, but yeah, just at this stage, there's further work that's needed in the animal health space. So before we get into the finances, we're going to have a presentation from Kanan Ahu from Agronomics. Kanan has been working with Align for 5 seasons now, focusing on our soil health and fertility, and has been a catalyst to some of the changes that we've made across our business. So I'll introduce Kanan, and he's going to take us through the fertiliser and fertility side of our business.
Awesome, thanks Rhys. Yeah, it's been a privilege working with Align. There's been heaps of cool things that have been uncovered over time. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about the background. We're not going to dive into heaps of detail, but sort of talk and present about some of our discoveries and where we come from and kind of where we're going to. Awesome. So ahead of us here, we have our non-regen side in terms of fertility game plan for this year. This is all based off soil tests, and we've done a lot of data collection over the last 5 years. A lot of per paddock soil testing, a lot of measuring and trace elements right through to biology count and other aspects. Where we've come from has been reasonably high on the end, not unusual for Canterbury, and just trying to work our way back from around that 280 units to probably what we'd call a more sustainable level of input. Some of the big issues for us initially was we had quite a low cost model as a company going back sort of 7 years and prior, and we've had a long way to come in terms of, I guess, reinvesting some minerals back into our farms. So that's been part of the challenge along the journey, and we've adapted sort of some interesting game plans to kind of help combat that. So in behind us here, we have clear view on the what we call non-regen or conventional side, and we're using a mixture of tow and fert and conventional. So where we see these green highlights going horizontally across the screen, we've got multiple products being added in a combination, and they are granulated. In these other rounds, so like the first round here in August, we've got MO30 at 75, that's all foliar. And so on the right hand side, we can kind of see that there's a cost difference in application. And for us, it's really we're using the foliar as a method to help reduce our input. There's a higher cost associated to that, so it needs to balance with, you know, other alternatives that we have. So we've come from being quite compact, really tight farm from a soil structure point of view, and that's been one of the first things we've been trying to iron out. Is create a lot of technicality along the way, and we're getting there and making some really good traction now, which is cool. So we're split between having granulated granulated fert mixed with foliar, and that gives us quite a few advantages. And so in this game plan, when we're adding foliar, we add humate to that. And down here, when we've got included SEM, we have a whole spectrum of trace elements that's getting coupled with that as well. There's multiple reasons for that. Part of it is to do with feeding biology. So in order to help fix our structure issues, we've got to basically highlight on some of the issues, and some of them for us have been calcium and fungi. And basically adding humate or humic substances has been one of the ways or vehicles that we've used to help reignite and create structure. If we have air in our soil, then the biology will then function and feed back to the plant. And so just because we have minerals in our soil doesn't necessarily mean that we have availability of that to the pasture and to the animal. And so you are what you eat. If we can kind of fix a lot of those base things, then that's going to have further impacting effects further up the chain. So splitting down capital fert, you'll notice that anytime that there's any form of P being used, it gets split out multiple times a year. Same for K when we use that, and same for traces. So the whole concept of little and often gives us the ability to pull levers to then feed the plant and feed the animal. And so we do a lot of herbage testing in throughout the season to kind of back that and make sure that we are pulling the right levers at the right time and getting the system to move forward. On to the regen side. So we call this mixed species. This year we're 148 hectares. We still have a couple of paddocks that are ryegrass and clover more dominated, and they haven't gone through a transitional phase just yet. And we're in that process at the moment. So overall, from when we started, we really tried to look at, can we achieve very minimal input from a mineral perspective altogether? Can the biology take forms from, say, total P and make that available back to the plant? Now, in our learnings, we've learned some things like sulfur. We do need to have some form of control of input. And so using what forms that are going to be suitable to help us move forward, yet actually get the soil into a position that it can fire up and start to remineralize itself essentially. And so nitrogen's really easy. Sulfur's a little bit more hard. We don't have as much sulfur in our atmosphere as we once did. So trying to get the system to function and work. So here we've used guano as our P source. If we look at the total units of P, not a lot. And we're finding that with the way that we're managing that and where we're going to and coming from, we're actually able to sustain and hold our P levels despite there being a reasonable amount of production out. And so there's a little bit of cleverness in how we've managed to make that happen, but essentially it's a biological driven process. So we've kind of got some solid stuff from the regen point of view, and we see that with this green horizontal line. In between that, we're probably going to get around the farm with slightly slower round lengths. We're sort of expecting that we might be somewhere between 6 and 7 rounds in a year we'll go around. And we've created basically a biological stimulant brew. So we're carrying this through tone fert, and we have a few trace elements in there to couple or back off what we're doing from a granulated point of view. So using things like fish, EM, seaweed, we're trying to induce biology, basically re-inoculate some of those microfamilies that we've missed out on, and then couple that with some things like cobalt, molybdenum, boron, some of the minor things that we need to kind of keep ourselves moving, and it backs off what we have from a granulated form. So we still are spending some money here. One of the things that we've been trying to mitigate our way through is we can't just exclusively say, hey, cool, we're going to run this trial. We still have commercial objectives to sit in with and to work towards. And so within that scope, we've been in this journey of like, how do we shed that? How do we get the best out of that? And if I'm really honest, Align has really challenged beliefs for a lot of us, including myself. And this next slide, this is actually taken in March this year off the back of this paddock here that is less than 25 units, went through one of those really colourful crops. We had a lot of diversity. This paddock has done a whole season now post coming out of that, and it literally has less than 25 units. If we tally up what come through with the fish and so forth, I think it literally comes to actually less than 10, and that's kind of minor detail. But visually here, I just want us to really highlight, like, they've really blown the cap on what we perceive as being possible. and I'd really like to give credit back to the line for really testing that out and coming on that journey. And so for us, even our conventional side at 160 units at that point, we were in the trajectory to hit sort of 180, 190 on that front. I don't think we made it there in the end in terms of using it all. But how do we as farmers get the system to function as best as we can and work within nature's principles has been a massive journey for us. So we've come from that 280, even in our conventional, we're doing some cool things there. But really this hypothesis of like, man, how far can we push this? I got a lot of respect for these guys. They're pushing some pretty cool things. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of some of the background knitting around what we've been up to.
Thanks, Kanan. Certainly appreciate your help and expertise in the journey as well. And certainly from my perspective, I think when we come into this trial 2 years ago, I was quite worried about cutting in out of our business and not so worried about the P&K side, where I've probably done the complete reversal now, where in something that I'm comfortable with. I've experienced it for 2 seasons, where the P&K side's an area that we need to make sure we're executing to. So I'm sure you've got that covered. So that's brings us to the end of the fertility piece, and now we'll move on to the finance side of our business. So milk production, these are budget milk production. So we're targeting just under 1,700 on the conventional side and 1,350 on the regen side. And yeah, probably what's interesting is we were targeting that 423 milk solids a cow on the regen side and 440 on the conventional side. But at this stage, we're ahead of target on the regen side. So I think long term, I can't see a reason why we can't do 450 milk solids a cow on both systems, which moves the regen side up to about 1570 a hectare. And I think the conventional side goes to about 1770 a hectare. So that's probably what we need to be targeting next year if we really want to push the finances along. We need to move we were kind of expecting the regen side to be 420 at best. We thought, oh, that's optimistic, but looks like we were quite pessimistic, and 450 is definitely on the cards for next year. So we've been quite impressed with the regen production, to be fair. Like we've had struggles on both sides. Like the season's not great, but at a macro level, we're really positive that 450 can be achieved, and even 500 milk solids a cow's not off the table if you get that feed intake right and can get the pasture utilisation well at those higher covers. I think even 500's on the cards down the track. So around the finance piece of it, so animal expenses per cow are higher on the regen side, so that's just a direct correlation with more treatments. So we're expecting that to be lower. We budgeted that to be lower. Feed expenses are higher on the conventional side per cow, and that's really just a correlation with the 600 milk solids, 600 kgs of grain per cow versus the 223. We've exceeded our grain target on the regen cows. One of the challenges we've had with the trial is our young stock performance has been quite poor this year. When I mean young stock, I'm meaning first calvers. Just being inside, normally in a normal farm, you would draft them out and run them separately, or with the lighter cows. We're with the 2 systems, where our expectation on Curry would be to run 4 to 6 herds, which is that's not going to go down too well. So we kind of now we're having to preferential feed those younger cows. So we're actually dribbling in grain at 3 kilos a cow into the heifers at the moment, trying to build their body condition score up on both herds, which is effectively meaning we're feeding more feed on the regen side. So, but that's greenwashing. We have had to put more supplement into both systems this year, solely on the back of poorer pasture production and low covers coming back from the season. So look, I think over time you'll see a bigger gap than that, but at this stage it's about $200 a cow difference. Pasture expenses, there's obviously it's almost double per hectare, and that's no secret that fertiliser costs are at an all-time peak at the moment, and that's really pushing up our it's a good year not to be putting urea on the regen side, and that's really good. But the conventional side, I think we're about $40,000 over budget on fertiliser on that side of the farm. So there's no secret there. That's where the big wins have got to come from. The big wins in regen have got to come from feed expenses and pasture expenses. Operating expenses are lower per hectare, and that's just a sign of less cows, so less input and less inputs needed, etc. And overhead expenses are lower per kg of milk solids. Like we split the management fee and different fees, like rates and insurance get split per hectare, but overhead expenses are lower on the region side, mainly because of management fees and different kind of overhead expenses that come through. We split them per milk solid, so that's kind of the split. And the two big ones that you really need to drive expenses down is feed expenses and pasture expenses. And we've kind of got the pasture expenses one nail, but yeah, the feed expenses been, we would have liked that to have been about $300 a cow, but at 622 certainly putting a bit of pressure on. So that's, yeah, have you got anything to say there, Kira?
No, just the feed. Both sides actually should come down quite a bit next year if we can position ourselves with silage cut from the farm. Obviously, the whole of Canterbury was struggling for feed over winter, so we were in the same boat, even more so. And I think the quality of feed that went in probably wasn't that great to reflect on production. And then the pasture expenses, I expect that to be even less next year, potentially on both sides. The reason being is we did have to do quite a bit of regrassing as well, due to the flood and obviously making mess over the winter.
Yeah. So here's just a pie graph to see where their expenses are made up from. So it kind of gives you the impression that at this stage, feed expenses are making up 30% of the costs or farm working expenses on the conventional side versus 33% on the region side. And then vice versa, 31% of the cost of the conventional side is animal expenses versus 35%. So it just gives you a gauge on where the money's been spent. And there are differences between the sides. So it's not something that we'll go through, but we'll keep you updated on how this tracks. But it's fairly consistent with what we would have expected. So from a finance perspective, this is kind of actuals versus forecasts. So this is how we shape down. So about 3.8 cows versus 3.2, about 250,000 milk solids versus 201,000. And yeah, $8.40 farm working expenses. $8.40 payout. Apologies, and 35 cents stock. So a gram of $8.75. So there's about 2.18 million coming in of revenue on the conventional side and 1.7 coming in on the region side. So it's about 400K difference. And then you drop down to the expenses line. There's farm working expenses of 1.2 million on the conventional side and 905,000 on the region side. So the big ones are feed expenses are near on, there's 200 grand in that, and pasture expenses is just shy of 100 grand. So that's where the big savings have been made. So certainly getting the lower farm working expense on the region side, which is good. However, the revenue line's so strong this year that it have an effect on EBIT, which is the next slide. So your farm working expense on the conventional side is going to be about 498, which I think is going to be fairly consistent with most farms this year. Like that, that's up from a budget of 442. And our region side is got a farm working expenses of 451. So that's just a reflection of the inflationary pressure that we find ourselves on across every line in our business. So probably the big driver is operating profit or EBIT per hectare, which is the conventional side at 6,300 and the region at 5,700. So there's kind of a $600 a hectare difference between the two systems, which, when you put it into context, there's 20 years of experience in conventional and 20 minutes in regen. We're kind of just learning, and to be $600 a hectare different is, we're quite happy with that, to be fair. Like we're not jumping and having marching bands to the parade, but we're happy enough with that. We're competing, at a high payout. If the payout gets to 620, those two numbers are even. So really at this stage, chasing that revenue was strong. So for us, there's an opportunity cost to this whole thing, but probably the piece that we're comfortable with is what does it take for us to become profitable, and more profitable or equal is really improving that per cow production, which we haven't quite nailed this year, and then getting some of those further costs out of our business. So, we're realistic that we're missing. It's about 90 grand between the two sides of profit. So it's if you spread that across every farm in New Zealand, there's $1.2 billion out of the economy, which isn't going to tick too many boxes. But from our perspective, at $600 a hectare difference is competitive. We're not going broke at those numbers. And then one area that we're quite interested in is from an overseer perspective. So our end loss per hectare on the conventional side is 64, and our regenerative side is 40. So there's a 24 kg of end loss per hectare difference between the two sides. So if you work out an end loss efficiency number or profit per kg of end loss, we're making $99 per kg of end loss on our conventional side and $144 per kg of end loss on our regenerative side. And I personally feel that this is going to be one of the key metrics that will compare farm systems and differing farm systems into the future. I think most farmers will understand this number going forward, and this will be a key metric. So we're quite impressed that yes, we're more profitable on the conventional side, and that's got to be the driver. From an end loss perspective, we're turning that into $144 on the regen side and $99 on the conventional side, which is efficiency wise is good. So we're quite pleased with that. To be fair, that's something that we're quite proud about, that we're getting our efficiency right. However, we just need a drive for more EBIT, and that'll be done through higher milk production and getting our supplementary costs down, which that's all around pasture utilisation is probably the key ticket. We know we can grow the feed, but can we harvest it? And that's probably the bit that will drive the EBITDA higher, will be pasture utilisation. So have you got any views there, Kerry?
No.
So I believe that's our last slide, is it? Yeah, so from my perspective, and thanks for watching. It's been a great journey. It's only been a 6 months journey. It's probably going to take us 6 years before we can really give you some really pronounced data. But I hope that we've given you something today that sparks some interest, and we'll receive some questions for our Q&A next week. And we invite you all to our field days early December. But we're happy with how it's gone to date. There's been some deep lows and some really, really big highs. And I guess, we're still learning day by day, making mistakes hour by hour. But one thing we are really proud about is that we can put some transparency to this and try and show the communities and the industry what can be done at a lower farming footprint. And I trust you all have got something out of today.
Yeah, so thank you for watching, and I do strongly advise to come to the field days on the 7th and the 9th of December if you can. I've had so much feedback from people that do come and visit the farm that they say you don't realise what it's like until you actually come here and see it, and you see the surroundings, that it's not all just sunflowers and sunflowers and kids and sunflowers. So I do think it'd be beneficial if you could come visit it. And if you can't make the 2 days, then we're certainly open to have people come on farm in the new year.
I had someone on farm today that said to me, he said, "Oh, I thought it was just going to be sunflowers and hippies around here." So hopefully we didn't get any of those ticks on those boxes.
So I will include links to our question and answer period, which will be next week, Wednesday the 1st at 11 a.m. If you want to submit any questions you have, we will address them in the live video that you're welcome to join. And any questions that we don't get to in the video will be put up on our website. We'll also put links to tickets for the visit to the farm on the 7th and the 9th. So thanks, everyone.